Opportunity for eligible borrowers to refinance out of adjustable rate subprime mortgages into a fixed rate product. There's more information about that on our website, but I would encourage you to go on, take a look at with borrowers who are currently impacted by increased interest rates and are facing foreclosure. They will be held in Norwich, Waterbury, Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport beginning in March. Experts here today who are going to give you a very good overview of what's going on in Connecticut and some of the things we're doing to resolve it. Let me just thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see you, and enjoy the afternoon.
In an order of presentation, we will have Josh Silver, who is Vice President of Research and Policy for the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, Ken Willis, who is Vice President and Director of Housing and Community Investment for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, and Bridget Russell, who is Managing Director of the NHS of New Haven Homeownership Center. Thank you.
We're going to play a game show. I'm going to go downstairs here, and so I can see the PowerPoint. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having the National Community Reinvestment Coalition here today with you, talking about this very important topic. Thank you so much for the other hosting organizations. This is a very important thing that you're doing for your community. In the newsletter, you'll notice a quote from Joan Carty that says, "We have been extremely pleased to have the participation of NCRC on our panels throughout Connecticut. NCRC has brought depth and awareness to this critical issue." And I thank you, Joan, for that gracious quote. And indeed, my fellow panel members, Ken and Bridget, we've been sort of forming a speaker circuit around Connecticut. And Melvina in the audience today has also done a terrific job on previous panels talking about this critical issue. I usually produce printouts of my PowerPoint, but on the red background it doesn't print out too well. So if anyone wants the PowerPoint, I invite you to sign up on this contact sheet, and I'll be happy to email you the PowerPoint. And also if you want more information about NCRC. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way because the remote does not work, so Mike is my remote control. So next slide, please. What is abusive lending? Usually you start with these conversations defining what is abusive lending and how it's different from responsible prime lending and responsible subprime lending. Prime lending, as you know, is market rate lending to people with good credit. And right now the interest rate is around 6.5%. So if you have pristine credit, you can go and get about a 6.5% interest rate, 30-year fixed. Subprime lending, still a little feedback. Can you hear me without it? Okay, I might go without it. If anyone has trouble hearing me, just raise your hand and I'll speak on the mic. Subprime lending is high-cost lending to borrowers with imperfect credit. It is lending at a higher interest rate than prime lending to compensate for the extra risk of lending to people with credit imperfections. The way I like to think about it is if I'm late on my credit card payments or periodically late on my payments, it takes the servicer or the lending institution a little more work to work with me than, say, if Joan is perfect paying every time. Maybe I need a repayment plan or a loan modification, and it takes more work and effort. I'm maybe more likely to default on my loan, so I get a higher interest rate to compensate for the extra risk of lending to me. And responsible subprime lending does fill an important credit need in the marketplace. But abuses occur when you have certain borrower groups and neighborhoods receiving a disproportionate amount of high credit risk of lending to somebody with a credit imperfection. Okay, if I'm late on my bills, maybe I get an 8% loan. But do I need a lot of abusive terms and conditions that make my fees 5 or 10% of the loan amount or even higher, when usually for a prime borrower, fees are about 1% of the loan amount. When you load up loans with a lot of abusive fees and products that are unnecessary, you make it more likely that somebody's going to end up in foreclosure. And also, when I used to do this presentation a few years ago, I used to say predatory lending is a subset of subprime lending. Not anymore, ladies and gentlemen. There is some prime lending that can also be predatory in nature. A lot of these, you've heard about in the newspaper, these teaser loans that start at a low interest rate and then increase dramatically after a few years, and the borrowers are not always aware that the interest rate is going to increase. A lot of these adjustable rate loans occur in subprime lending, but it is also an issue in prime lending. Another issue in prime lending is these option adjustable rate mortgage loans, where the borrower even has the option, if the borrower wants, to not even pay the interest rate that's due every month, let alone the principal. And a lot of borrowers don't know that when you do that, you face dramatic payments later on down the road. Next slide. There is a phenomenon the last couple of years. It's sad. I've been talking about predatory lending since the late 1990s, and for the first few years, we would talk about abusive terms and conditions. But the lending, ladies and gentlemen, from 2005 to 2007 has basically been predatory lending on steroids. It is unbelievable the amount of risk in these loans and the dangerous terms and conditions that have resulted in record foreclosure rates. And one thing that the experts talk about is risk layering, where you have a lot of risky terms piled on top of each other. There is a type of another name for these loans are liar loans. And sometimes, if you're a wealthy investor, and for whatever reason you don't want to document your income to the lender, but you have, otherwise you're a good, you have good credit history, maybe that's okay for that niche. But what's happened is this type of lending has gone and spread throughout widely in the marketplace. And for a lot of borrowers who are not aware of what's going on, it is dangerous lending. There is the second bullet point says that 43% of the brokers that have done low documentation lending say, this isn't a survey, say that borrowers cannot qualify under standard conservative debt-to-income ratios or standard underwriting. They're using low documentation lending to qualify people who otherwise really probably should not get a loan yet, who should build up their savings. And that's an astounding statistic in my mind. In the year 2000, only 2% of the loans were interest-only or option arms. I talked about option arms just a minute ago, where the borrower has the option of, you don't even have to pay your interest rate every month. In the year 2000, 2% of the loans were of this nature. In the year 2006, 40% of the loans were of this nature. Too much risk, too fast. And what was going on? Well, we know the last few years there was rapid housing appreciation, and some of this lending was going on to qualify people for the rapid. They tended to have high loan-to-value ratios, so the borrowers were really leveraged in a high amount of debt. And they tended to be low documentation loans, that I just talked about. I'm going to go to the next slide. The last, let me just stop for a second. In the last couple of weeks, my daughter got the flu and then I got the flu. And what's going on is, this is almost like the flu. At first it afflicted minority and low-income neighborhoods, and now this is spreading like the flu or an epidemic into middle-income America, ladies and gentlemen. And one thing that, one phenomena is resets. The experts talk about resets. This is where your adjustable rate mortgage, the rate was fixed for about 2 or 3 years, and then the rate can jump dramatically. During the course of 2007 and 2008, we're going to have 2 million of these loans, of these adjustable rate mortgage loans, that are going to reset to higher rates. So there is a real issue on the national agenda. There is a Federal Reserve governor that says that 400,000 loans are going to be resetting every quarter, and in 2000 that is double the pace of just a year ago, where 200,000 of these loans were resetting. So 200,000, now we have 400,000 of these loans resetting every 3 months. What's the interest rate typically? Well, it starts off on a subprime adjustable rate mortgage at 7%. That's the teaser rate. That's the low rate. That's higher than most of us probably can get a mortgage for. And then the first rate, the first reset, it goes up to 9.5%. Again, this is a Federal Reserve governor telling us this, which causes an increase in the monthly payment of about 30%. Next slide. What does all this cause? This causes record delinquencies and foreclosures. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke said in a speech in the fall of 2007 that 15% of subprime adjustable rate mortgages were 90 days or more delinquent in the summer of 2007. That's triple the rate of 2005. So we went from 5% delinquency in subprime adjustable rate mortgages to 15% delinquency. Next slide. What does it look like across the country and in the great state of Connecticut? Nationally, the subprime delinquency rate was 6.7% in 2005, and then in 2007 it was 12.4%. This is the Joint Economic Committee. And in Connecticut, it was high in both 2005 and 2007, 11% in 2005 and 12.5% in 2007. New Haven, it also started out high and it climbed, it spiked greater. 11% in 2005, 14.6% subprime delinquency rate in 2007. Next slide. Foreclosures. Delinquencies cause record foreclosure rates. Again, Federal Reserve Governor, an average of 320. By the way, if you look at the Federal Reserve speeches, you have some great material for advocates. I highly encourage you to, and also read the testimony of the FDIC chairman. Very powerful testimony as well. An average of 320,000 foreclosure starts in 2007, and that's much higher than previously is 240,000. 320,000 foreclosures every 3 months. It's more than 1 million foreclosures in a year. So what's being done? The FDIC chairman, Sheila Bair, has done a terrific job leading and really trying to get the industry to do loan modifications, or to modify the loan terms and conditions to make the loans affordable. Well, in the fall of 2007, she cites a Moody's survey saying just 1% of the loans, of the subprime loans with problems have been modified, just 1%. And now there's been some subsequent surveys, and we're still in the single digits. So we still have a ways to go. Next slide. Consequences of foreclosure. I don't have to lecture you on what is intuitively obvious when you drive around the neighborhoods in New Haven and other places. It's wealth loss. It's devastating for families and communities. The Joint Economic Committee estimates 2 million subprime foreclosures from 2007 through 2009. In that time period, $71 billion in housing wealth that is lost. In Connecticut, $1.4 billion in home equity loss and $19 million in property tax loss. This is a big problem for state and city governments as well. Next slide. Steering. Steering is a phenomena of placing somebody who qualifies for a lower cost loan into a higher cost loan. Let me use myself as an example. I was the reverse of steering. I managed the last few years through a couple of refinances. Remember back in 2000, the interest rates were around 7 or 8%. Now, because I refinanced a couple of times, I have 14 years left on my mortgage, and I have a 4.65% APR. Because I've done that, I've done a couple of refinances, I've saved my family around $200,000. And I hope that $200,000 will enable me to send my daughter to college when she's 8 now. So in 10 years, I hope I can afford a college. I don't know if I can send her down to Yale, but anyway. Now imagine the reverse process, where somebody is placed into an 8% loan when they really should be getting a 6% loan. Ladies and gentlemen, that could easily be $50,000 of loss over 30 years for that family. Now imagine if that happens to 10 families on the block, or 10 families in the neighborhood, a neighborhood of 500 people. You've literally lost $1 million, millions of dollars in that neighborhood that is now transferred to a predatory lender. And that is dollars that people could be sending their kids to college, could be dollars that people could be starting small businesses with, dollars that could be recycled through the neighborhood, through patronizing neighborhood stores. So we're talking about, the bottom line is this is a loss of wealth. And a lot of us in this room are practitioners that are really trying to build wealth through home ownership and small business development. And predatory lending is the exact opposite process of bleeding neighborhoods and communities to death. Next slide. We did a study last summer called Income is No Shield against racial disparities in lending. And we actually found that believe it or not, as income increases, racial disparities in lending, the minorities are more likely, not less likely, to get a high-cost loan. And I'm actually not going to go through the bars in this slide. Go to the next slide. In Charlottesville, Virginia, African Americans were 3.8 times more likely than whites to get a high-cost loan. Now, some people may say, well, it's due to differences in credit worthiness. Well, I actually have a few slides later than this, that we were able to obtain some credit worthiness data only on a one-time basis. In controlling for credit worthiness, we still found some more high-cost loans. We still found more subprime loans in minority neighborhoods as the number of minorities increased in the neighborhood. And Federal Reserve economists were doing a similar study around the same time we were, and came to a very similar conclusion. So Charlottesville, Greenville, North Carolina, it's also very high racial disparity. But believe it or not, those communities actually called me on the phone, called NCRC, and wanted us to come down and speak, just like I'm doing with you guys just now, and hopefully it spurs some action in those localities. And I'll talk about local strategies in a little bit. So next slide. This is disparities in high-cost lending to Hispanics. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, Hispanics are 3.5 times more likely than whites to receive a high-cost loan. Next slide. Now I'm moving to New Haven, Connecticut. I wanted to frame up the national context a little bit. This is in the year 2005, and you see these pies. High-cost loans are kind of the light blue, and prime loans are kind of the teal. I think I'm not colorblind, but anyway. 49% of the loans received by African Americans were high cost. If you go to whites, 21% of the loans received by whites were high cost. So if you do the division, 49% divided by 21%, African American borrowers were 2.3 times more likely than whites to receive a high cost loan. And Hispanics were two times more likely than whites. Next slide, which I'm going to have you skip. It's also 2005. Next slide, skip as well. We're going to go to 2006, and I'm going to go through 2006 in a little more detail because 2006 is the most recent data that's publicly available from the federal government. In 2006, we call these disparities stubborn and persistent because you'll see that 2006 is very similar to 2005. So in New Haven, we still have a lot of work to do. 52% of the loans received by African Americans were high cost in 2006. 45% of the loans received by Hispanics were high cost. 22% of the loans received by whites were high cost. African Americans were 2.3 times more likely than whites to receive a high cost loan, and Hispanics are about 2 times more likely than whites. You go to the next slide. And this is just for low and moderate income borrowers. This is controlling by income level. So you see low and moderate income African American borrowers were 2 times more likely to receive a high cost loan than low and moderate income whites. Let's go to the next slide. I want to show you what happens when you go to middle and upper income borrowers. Middle and upper income African Americans were 2.6 times more likely than middle and upper income whites to receive a high cost loan. Notice 2.6. That's a greater disparity than when you look at low and moderate income borrowers. So why is that happening? Well, if you look at the numbers, 54% of the loans received by middle and upper income African Americans were high cost, compared to 20% of the loans to whites. And that's, the high number for middle and upper income African Americans compared to whites accounts for that disparity. If you actually look at the low and moderate income, the pies for the low and moderate income, the shares of high cost loans don't even actually increase a little bit for middle and upper income African Americans, and don't really move at all for middle and upper income. I mean, it's just astounding. So you go to the next slide. This is a map of New Haven, and tell me if I have the correct metropolitan area. I really hope I do. But anyway, the neighborhoods that have a higher percentage of minorities are the lighter colors, the white and the yellow. And this is each dot is a subprime loan. And you notice that there does seem to be a ring of dots where you have more minority neighborhoods here, and up here, and up here. Does anyone know those communities? Okay, there's some aldermen in the audience as well.